Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Pbogz here, bringing you yet another video for HUSitandGo.com. And before we get started here, I just want to let you guys know that since the holidays are coming up, definitely going to reduce my prices for you guys. $50 an hour on everything. That's including packages and whatnot. So hopefully PokerStars gets its way over here in no time. Build poker to what it once was, and hopefully the future looks bright. So hope you guys like the deals that I'm throwing at you, and let's get started on our video. Alright guys, so the title of the video that I'm going to be doing today is called The Information That Is Right in Front of Your Eyes, and this is basically for the guys who are either playing more regs, moving up in their divisions, going to, more expensive buy-ins, and running into some trouble with, let's say, players who are very aggressive. Guys who like to bet flops, bet turns, bet rivers, who check raise quite a bit, who donk out quite a bit. These are the kind of guys that you're going to run into once you start playing more regs, more experienced players, because their job is to put you in, difficult situations. So what this video is going to consist of, excuse me, is simply a few hand histories of certain situations where you're looking at board texture. You're looking at cards that you have in your hand that can maybe help, navigate what he can and cannot have in his range. You could also use hands that you don't have in your hand to maybe put some cards in his range as well. Sounds confusing, right? Well, it kind of is. So I think with mixing what you know about what regs really do. Sometimes regs will do things and they don't really make sense, because if they made a certain play, it would be them playing their cards face up, and some regs don't like to do that or shouldn't do that. On the flip side, there are some regs that just do things a lot differently than, let's say, what a recreational player does. So these are kind of concepts we're going to go over today. Very interesting stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed, and let's get started. Alright guys, so let's get this video started. There'll be a few hands in this video, all different concepts. Some are going to be in the big blind in raised pots, others are going to be in limped pots. So there should be some interesting spots here in all different facets of the game, post-flop, pre-flop, everything that every poker player goes through while playing a heads-up sit and go. So in this hand in particular, playing versus a player that I think is a bad reg, or at least a decent reg. Not really sure, to be honest with you. We have a small sample size, but he does sit lobbies a lot. And this is a spot where you have 5-4 suited, 30 big blind effective stacks. Don't get me wrong, this is a hand that we can definitely 3-bet bluff with. No doubt about it. Sometimes I like to play him a little bit slower and just flat. I decided to flat the 5-4 suited here. I don't think it's a big deal. Either one is fine, either option. So obviously in this video we're going to be talking about, just concepts of poker, how, regs play the game, what we can use that's right in front of us to help us navigate through certain hands. We want to use what we have in our hand to understand what he can and cannot have in his hand, using our hand to understand his ranges and understand what he can and cannot have based off what the board texture is allowing us to see. So this is a prime example of what I'm talking about here. So we have a pair of fives here, so we're definitely not folding here. This is a board that he's any reg is going to be c-betting quite a lot. They might check back some ace-x here, but more times than not, this is the board they're going to be c-betting because they know that there's going to be a lot of good barrel cards on later streets. From what we have in our hand, what can we basically tell ourselves that he might not have? Well, for example, we have a 4, which blocks the straight that is on the board. If he had 4-3, we'd be in a lot of trouble, right? But the fact that we have a 4 in our hand means it's a little less likely that he has the 3-4 in his hand. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certain circumstances, when even if you have the blocker, he's going to have it, right? These things happen once in a blue moon, but, just using what we have in front of our eyes to help us, to guide us in a sense, really goes a long way. It really does. You'll find out that it helps more times than it doesn't. So this is a spot where we have a 5-4 mid pair, gut shot straight draw, so we're definitely just going to check call here. bigger sizing here, which doesn't really indicate much. A lot of players bet a bigger sizing here because they don't want to be floated. So what do we know here when playing versus a reg? Well, this is a situation where the jack is a great barrel card for any reg, and more times than not, a reg is going to take the opportunity to continuation bet this flop. Now, obviously, with a hand like this, you want to put your opponent on a range. So what could he have here if he bets the turn? Well, first of all, let's see if he bets the turn. So he bets the turn here, and you want to peg him on a range, right? So he could have hands like 4-3, 6-5. But he could also have hands like 7-4, 7-8, 9-7, and a lot of error in his range. He could have picked up some equity with hearts. He could have a backdoor flush draw. He could also have some jack X as well. But I do think when he bets this turn, and with this sizing, it means that he doesn't have any 2x, doesn't have any 5x, and doesn't have any 6x with just pairs, because I think if he was going to bet the turn with a 6x here, he'd probably bet a little bit smaller with all intentions of checking back rivers. So based off of his bet sizing here, I'm going to say that he doesn't have a 6. So right here, once again, we have a pretty good bluff catcher, so there's nothing else to do but just to simply flat call here, see a river, and make sure it doesn't hit any part of his range, which is going to be something interesting to see on later streets. So once again, and the queen is basically a blank. It's a great card for us for two reasons. First of all, it doesn't connect with any of the draws that we talked about. No backdoor hearts, no 7-8, no 9-7 connects, no 7-4 connects, none of that stuff connected. So this is a good spot where I think if he bets this river, he has either A, misdraws, misdraws an error, or B, an absolute monster, like 2 pair or better. But I know that this card is another really good barrel card for him. So most regs would bet here. Some back out. I think that in this circumstance, I believe he checked back here. I still think he should bet this card. Even though, a lot of players would be able to pick him off here, this is a spot where if he checks back here, he's very unbalanced. So I do think that he needs a continuation bet with the river. And he had 7-4. So as you see here, just based off of our blockers, based off of what we know about how regs play, this is a simple solution of we use what we have in our hand to understand that he can't have certain holdings that already crush us, and with the knowledge of what good barrel cards look like, made it very easy to make a pretty decent call on the flop and turn, and obviously would have flatted the river as well. So let's get on to the next hand. Alright guys, and like I promised, different scenarios, different effective stacks, different kind of players. So let's see what we got here. So we're at 12.4 big blind effective stacks. We're pretty damn shallow, right? We have a hand like Queen Jack suited, which is a great hand to have out of position in my opinion. And we're playing versus a guy who's pretty good. He likes to limp trap late, so that's why this hand is very interesting. So let's see how this hand plays out. So he likes to limp here, and like I said before, he likes to limp trap. So even though, if I'm playing versus a guy who, let's say, is limping what I think is weak to middling stuff, I'm probably raising this hand up. But knowing that he limp traps with a lot of ace-6 and a lot of hands that probably crush Queen Jack, this is a situation where I'm going to check back, mainly because this hand plays really well out of position. So it's pretty good to have in your check back range if you're playing versus a guy who is trapping you. Sometimes Queen Jack offsuit is better just to have in your check back range, and raising Queen Jack for some opponents as well is going to be okay. So I do think raising here is still an option, but I think checking back is pretty good as well. So we check back here mainly because he's just limp trapping quite a bit, and this is a spot where he's going to have some ace-x in his range, but once again, it's unlikely for him to have a lot of ace-x in his range, because even if he is trapping, it's 12 big blinds. He might open shove a lot of weak ace-x. He might min-raise a lot of bigger ace-x. So I do think that even though ace-x is some traps, I do think that he's going to be aggressive in the small blind with a good fair share of those as well. Now here it's an interesting spot where we check and he bets, and obviously we're not folding here, right? It's a situation where yes, he could have some ace-x, yes, he could have some flush draws and straight draws and pairs, very true, but this is about where you just check call and just to see what he kind of does on the turn. So the king hits once again, and this is a spot where we want to see what he does, and we check, and he bets again, and now we have to really kind of put him on a range, right? So yes, he could have some ace-x here, and he could even probably value betting some king-x as well, knowing that there's no ace-x in our range, because more times than not, we're going to be isolating some ace-x when he does limp in this short stacked play. So I do think that knowing him, he'll probably assume that we don't have any ace-x in our range. So he bets again, and we have quite a hard decision on our hands here, don't we? I think the main thing here is look at board texture, right? So what hands can he have that are beating us right now, and what hands can he have that, let's say, he's drawing to? I don't think he's betting this turn with a 5 or a queen, so I do think his range looks a lot like semi-bluffs to air, and obviously some ace-x and some king-x. The good thing is that there's 2 flush draws on the board, right? So there's lots of opportunity for him to not have a made hand. On the flip side, what don't we have in our hand? Well, we don't have any hearts, and we don't have any clubs, which means that there's a very good chance that he could very easily have those two, one of the 2 flush draws in his range. Also, what do we have in our hand that prevents him from having another hand that really crushes us? Jack 10, right? So we have a jack, so it's unlikely that he has the jack 10 in his range. Don't get me wrong, there's always a chance for him to have the jack 10 in his range, but once again, it's a smaller possibility because of our blockers. It just helps guide you once again. So I do think this is a spot where I think there's enough bluffs in his range where I could flat here another street and see what he does on the river. So river comes to 3, which is a complete blank, right? So you have to figure that sometimes, you know, a player is going to just take the initiative here and fire away. With his frequencies here, he's c-betting a lot of flops, betting a lot of turns, and then, you know, 1 out of 3 on the river, which is very small sample, so we don't want to look too much into that river spot. But I do think, since he's been very aggressive on the flop and the turn, he could have plenty of bluffs in his range at this point, in my opinion. So when he bets here, he goes all in. So when he goes all in here, I think that we can take away a few hands here. I think we could almost take away king X here, because I don't know if this guy is good enough to understand that he could value bet a king X here, knowing that we never have any ace X, and over betting to make his hand look really weak. I don't think he's good enough to do that, in my honest opinion. So I think that his range now looks like ace X that he trapped us with, or a bunch of air, right? So I think this is a pretty easy call based off his frequencies. We have to be right 34% of the time, and I believe with all the draws out there and the fact that we have blockers to the straight, I think this is a pretty easy call in my opinion. And we make the call, and as you see, he had air. So he was a little bit aggressive in this spot. I'm not saying that I love the spot by him here. Not sure what exactly he was trying to rep in a sense. So yeah, I think more times than not, this is not a good spot to barrel off on his part. But I think it's a pretty easy call for us, just based off how many cards are out there that weren't made hands, and our blocker bets, and the hands that we didn't have in our hand. So as you see, taking all the information that's right in front of our eyes, putting it all together and making the best play possible is very key when you're playing versus good players. Alright, so as you see here, another different hand here, short stacked. This is actually a hyper match, which is, you know, obviously the other 2 were turbos. This is a hyper, so quite interesting just to go. And, you know, these games are different, very different, but at the same time, post-flop, they're very similar. And just using this concept and this, the knowledge that's right in front of our eyes, and that's universal in poker, in my opinion, so it really does help out. So here, in a sense, we 21 big blind effective stacks, we min raise Jack 8, and he flat calls here. And we get donk bet. And that's never fun, right? But this is a certain situation where, first of all, we understand that most of the time donk bets usually mean semi-bluffs. They're usually not that strong unless there's a lot of, you know, metagame and a lot of history behind the 2 players that are playing against each other. So here, right off the bat, I'm assuming that he probably has a lot of draws. Now, don't get me wrong, he could always have a queen X as well, but at the same time, it's a situation where I'm never folding here. So I think right here in this spot, it's pretty easy just to, just a flat call. Here we're in position, no reason to get crazy. Now this is where it gets interesting, right? So the turn hits a 2, and everybody's going to say, oh, well, he probably has the flush now, I got to fold. But it's also very interesting to understand that we have an 8 of hearts in our hand. And once again, like I said, very small percentage here. But having that 8 of hearts does help out with understanding that it's a little less likely that he has 2 hearts in his hand. So I do think that when you're playing for somebody who's really aggressive, this is a spot where we could still hero call this turn, because it's a spot where, guess what, we have a blocker to the 2 hearts that he needs to have in his hand to make our hand, just not look good at all. So I think this is another spot where we could easily flat call here, mainly because we have a blocker to the hearts, mainly because it's a spot where we could flat here and just see what he does in the river, and just put all our knowledge together to make the best possible decision on the river. So this is definitely a flat call here. If we didn't have a heart, it'd be a lot tougher in my opinion, but I think having the heart here is just a really good spot that we're in. And also, when he bets here, you want to put him on a range. So he's definitely not betting the turn here with an 8x, right? Not happening. He's not betting the turn here with the 4x. So his range now looks like Queen X plus, and obviously some missed straight draws, and then obviously maybe the flush as well. So the river comes and he checks, and that's it. We got to the point where it's a situation where we made the hard call on the turn. He checked now, and now everything kind of switches up, doesn't it? It's a situation where we go on the defensive to maybe thinking about betting for value here, right? It's a spot where, well, what is he checking back here that we can get value from? Well, first of all, if he's checking back and giving up, he's not going to call anyway, so that doesn't matter. But usually, the other reason why people check back is to A, trap, which is unlikely in this spot, because he should just shove if he had something, because effective stacks meet up pretty well. And then also if you picked up showdown value, right? So this is the spot where, what could he have with some showdown value since we got to the river and he didn't bet? Well, yeah, he could always have some weak Queen X. That's a possibility. He got scared of the flush, and maybe the straight that came in as well. Also, it's a situation where he could have hands like, 6-5. He could have hands like, 9, let's see, 6-3. Hands like that, where he basically just maybe cost some equity on the turn and decide to bet as well. So there are some hands here that he picked up some showdown value. So there's a lot of 6x that we can get some showdown value with, in my opinion. And maybe we should bet it. It wouldn't be that bad of an idea, in my opinion. I'm not really sure what happens here. We decide to check, which is fine. And as you see, he had pure air. King 7. So obviously, this is probably not a reg. This is more of a recreational player. But as you see, just having that extra blocker there on the turn really goes a long way. Now, if you bet the river there, I'm probably folding. And the reason I'm probably folding is because not only did the flush draw get there, but straight draws got there as well. So it's a situation where, he's got a lot of draws that hit, and there's just not that much air in his range, and more times than not, recreational players and even sometimes regs aren't going to barrel off 3 streets with pure air, because usually when a player calls to the turn, by then they have something and it's going to be very hard to make them fold. So it's another interesting spot where, not necessarily just on the river, but on the turn as well, using the cards that you have in your hand to understand what he can and cannot have in his hand. And as you see, the hearts right here, really helped us out. He didn't have any hearts in his hand, and the little percentage points that swings our way with having these type of hands really does the trick, in my opinion. Alright guys, so the next hand here is more of a hand, a little bit more complex hand. This is a better player that we're playing against here, and I think in this hand he does make a mistake, but at the same time it's a good spot to go over. It really helps understand, when you're playing versus good players, sometimes when they try to look strong, it means that they're very, very weak. So this is a very good spot here. So let's see. So we raised the 3x here, and just a little bit of history on this guy is that he's very aggressive in the small blind, and as you see, he's opening a wide range. He's c-betting a lot of flops, turns, and rivers as well. So it's a situation where my adjustment versus a guy like this is I usually like to check raise my bottom pairs, because I know that if they're really low pairs, it's a situation where I'm not getting to the river and with it without having a really tough spot ahead of me with potentially 4 overcards, and I have to hero call my 5th pair in a spot where it's just a really tough spot that I don't like being in. So I just adjusted by check raising my bottom pairs and basically turning them into a bluff. So as you see here, really dry board here. This is a spot where I should be check raising anyways versus a lot of players because it's a very dry board, very hard for him to continue here. So I do think that this is a spot that we want to attack more times than not versus regs and versus recreational players. So here I decide to attack here. Bottom pair, backdoor flush draw. Not a bad spot at all, in my opinion. And he clicks back here again. And this is what I was talking about here. If this guy, I know this guy is good, right? Or I know that he's a thinking player, I should say. So why would he ever re-raise his queen here or better, right? When he has the nuts on such a dry board. Like, why would he ever do that? Because he knows that there's going to be a lot of good barrel cards on later streets that I can just barrel away my air on, and he could just bluff catch me all the way down to Value Town. So I think this is a situation where he's trying to look super strong, and in return, he looks super weak. And I think that's a really big mistake on his part here. So I know right here that, you know, once in a blue moon he'll have some value here, but I think it's very unlikely. So I'm just going to flat and turn my hand into a bluff catcher here now. So as you see, I turned my hand into a bluff, and now I'm turning the same exact hand into a bluff catcher. And these are the kind of things that happen on the fly when it comes to playing versus regs. So obviously here, 10, great barrel card for him, right? Doesn't connect to anything here. It's a situation where he knows that it's a good barrel card because it doesn't really connect with any, it doesn't connect any straight draws here. On the flip side, he could have picked up some value as well. So let's see what he does on the turn. So he bets here once again. So there's a few things that can go into play here. First of all, he doesn't have value. So he either has complete air or he has draws here. So he could have hands like 5-6, 8-6, you know, some gutters like that. Also, he could have picked up some equity here with the flush draw. He could have picked up equity with hands like Jack 9, Jack 8, even hands like King Jack, but I really don't think he's going to be clicking back a hand with King Jack. So it's very interesting to see what he could potentially have in his range here. And what also is very important is the fact that we don't have any blockers to any of those hands, right? So you could very easily have Jack 9, Jack 8, 5-6, you know, some gutters as well. And I think it's a spot where I think, once again, I know that this is a good barrel card, and I'm going to flat once again. Now, the 3 isn't the greatest card for us here. Now, this is a spot where we check river, and if he checks, we're happy. If he doesn't, then, you know, we have an interesting decision on the river here. So he goes all in here. So when he goes all in here, once again, I'm going with my original idea that he doesn't have any value that he hit on the flop. He has pure air. So or obviously some kind of draw. So I think that the only draw that got there on the river was 5-6, and we don't have any blockers at 5-6. So that's the only hand in his range here, in my opinion, that beats us here. So while I'm in this hand here, I'm thinking he either has 5-6 or I got him beat. And there's so many other missed draws out there. There's so many missed hearts that we don't have any blockers to. All the Jack 9 and the Jack 8s that we don't have any blockers to, so he could have them in his range. All the gutters that missed that he could also have in his range that we don't have any blockers to. So these things are always very important. So yes, he could have 5-6, but it's the only hand that beats us in this spot. So I think this is a pretty easy call. Not to mention we only have to be right 20% of the time. And I just see recall and Jack 9. So yeah, it's a situation where, you know, those hands are very vital. Understanding that we don't have any blockers to all the draws that are out there. So when we don't have them in our hand, there's a possibility that he could have in his hand, and just weighing out the option. Now, nothing's ever going to be concrete. There's never going to be a spot where you 100% know exactly what he has, but these are the type of plays you have to make versus good players, because they're going to be putting you in spots like this for sure. So I do think he made a mistake, but at the same time, applying a lot of pressure, and a lot of players would have folded on this spot. Alright guys, well I just want to wish you guys good luck with grinding. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I think the main thing to take from the video was just, you know, don't hesitate to use what is right in front of you to make the best possible decisions. The one thing I do want to warn you with though is that, you know, making those hero calls versus regs is a lot better than making those hero calls. Let's say versus recreationals, where you're stuck in a spot where you have middle pair and you're not really sure, and you're like three hands in. That's a spot where you definitely don't want to make too many hero calls versus recreational players. But when you're playing versus regs, you understand that they're going to bluff in a lot of those spots. They're going to put you in those really tough spots. And I do think when it doesn't make sense, or you do know that it makes sense for them to be bluffing in those spots, those are the times where we have to use all of our information to just make our life a lot easier. So I think with all the knowledge that we've just seen in the video, I think just use that, throw that in your into your own game, and you'll be good to go, and you'll be moving up and crushing in no time. So good luck, guys, and I will talk to you later. Hope you enjoyed the video, and take care.